Good afternoon and welcome to Exit Strategies for Retiring Lawyers, How to Avoid the Three Biggest Mistakes. Brought to you by the ABA Senior Lawyers Division and our sponsor, Roy Ginsburg. Roy Ginsburg is a practicing lawyer and an attorney, coach, and law firm consultant. Roy, I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you. I want to welcome everyone, and I appreciate you tuning in to today's program, Exit Strategies for Retiring Lawyers. It goes without saying that the present pandemic, the COVID-19, has been a wake-up call for a lot of attorneys. It's a not so subtle reminder that indeed how fragile life has become. I know some of you may disagree with me, but the reality is lawyers still have a 100% mortality rate and do need to plan. For many of you, I suspect those of you thinking about retirement, billing is not as much fun as it used to be. And you're probably as confused as Tompkins is here. How I envy you, Tompkins, with that great, big, wonderful life out there waiting for you to retire into. I'm going to try to eliminate the confusion that some of you have so you can avoid the three biggest mistakes that I have seen lawyers make during my time as a consultant and coach. And the idea is to hopefully save you some time, money, and angst. Let me give you a little bit more about my background. I have been actually a practicing lawyer since the early 80s. I spent the first 20 years practicing law for full-time in a big firm, small firm, and also in-house. Past 15, I've been though coaching and consulting with law firms in the areas of business development, practice management, and of course, exit strategies and succession plannings. And over the years, I've helped perhaps close to around 100 lawyers, all practice areas, all parts of the country, with devising what their exit strategy should be. I'm going to talk about the three mistakes by discussing some cautionary tales, tell you some stories of some previous clients of mine and what are the things that you should avoid. The first one is the hire to retire strategy. We'll talk about that. Then why it's oftentimes a good idea not, I want to emphasize the word not, to listen to your CPA, as well-intentioned as he or she may be. And the final is, of course, the fear that I suspect many of you have out there, and that is, dying at your desk and how to deal with them. So let's talk about the first cautionary tale. We'll talk about Mary. Mary had a very successful immigration practice in Philadelphia, and she decided, again, we're talking about the hire retire strategies. I'm going to hire a newbie right out of law school, and the idea was I'm going to train this newbie. And a few years out of the starting gate, and she'll buy me out. And what happened was, ultimately though, she was betrayed. How was she betrayed? What happened was, after a few years, they decide, I can do this myself. What do I need Mary for? They've opened up shop, and to add insult to injury, the associate who left, the newbie, left with some of her clients. And she was not a happy camper when she called me. She's not the first lawyer who has called me that has tried this particular hire to retire strategy. But when you think about it, and rarely do lawyers think about it, it's on its face a fundamentally flawed strategy. And here's why. First, we think about it, how easy it is to find a good associate. Many of you, I'm sure, have hired in the past and realize easier said than done to find someone really good. And think about, usually if they're a real newbie, they often have a lot of debt. So as a practical matter, it's going to be really hard for many of them to buy you out. But again, going back to just, you all know in all the coaching I've done over the years, perhaps the biggest problem that solo and small firm lawyers have is, personnel management, hiring, firing. So don't have any illusions that somehow now at the end of your career, it's going to be easy to find that perfect. But let's even assume you find the perfect young lawyer to take over. Do you really want to spend the last years of your career, breaking somebody in who may or not be a good learner? Think about that. That's puts it into question about how successful it's going to be. And here's the problem that a lot of lawyers don't recognize is, where is the extra money to come? I suspect many of you tuning in here today are solo practitioners. Let's say you're grossing $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. And you come up with this idea of hiring the younger lawyer to take over. You got to pay that lawyer. even if it's a bare minimum of like 50K or maybe 75K. And you've been making, let's say comfortably, you've been taking home 100, 150, even $200,000. Where is that extra money going to come from to pay that new associate? It's probably going to come right out of the profits. In other words, there's usually not enough business. A newbie's not going to bring business to the table. So you'll be paying money that's normally would have been, profits to you, and you're going to pay this new associates in the hope that they buy you out. So even if it does work out and they do buy you out, in effect, you're getting your own money back. So you're subsidizing your own retirement at the end of the day. So again, not a good idea. And then finally, as we all know, lawyers are free to compete. They can always stab you in the back and leave and open up shop across the street, which is in fact what happened, to Mary. So again, not such a good idea, and a bad strategy. Now, some of you may be thinking to yourself, didn't John or didn't Joan do some sort of buyout with a younger lawyer? And I thought it worked with them. Well, you know what probably happened with them? Yes, it sometimes works, but generally speaking, it works when the senior lawyer is more like 45 or 50, hires a young lawyer. And why do they hire the young lawyer? They need someone to get the work out. So in other words, there's no issue of losing profits. Hopefully, actually, the new associate's going to help you make more money. And then it just works out that, hey, the person was in the right place at the right time. They've worked together for 5, 10, 15 years, and it's a no-brainer to do the buyout. So yeah, someone could say, yeah, I hired this person with the idea of taking over the practice. But trust me, at the time, that was maybe in the back of their, on the radar screen, not front and center. So the few times that you do hear about it, typically it was not necessarily the hire retire. I get at least 1 or 2 phone calls a year from a lawyer saying, I tried that and it didn't work for all the reasons that I've just explained. So if anything, I know people didn't pay anything to hear this, but don't do this. It's worth the money you spent. Okay, let's move on to the second cautionary tale, time to make fun of bean counters. And I love making fun of them because they are very, very, very well intentioned, giving appraisals, but it never usually is worth it. They are not, don't be deceived. And I'm going to talk about the cautionary tale, and I'll talk about David, a client of mine. David was a very successful estate planning lawyer, and estate planning lawyer is actually good practice to sell because theoretically you can explain to a buyer that, hey, people are going to come back and revise wills. There should be business there, and there should be business in probate when somebody sadly passes away. All right, David had some two capable insiders who he wanted to do a deal with, but he was, very puzzled, didn't really sure about how to price a deal for the insiders that were very capable. So he asked his accountant. The accountant come back and says, I think you should, ask for 3 times gross revenue. And he, was very happy. 3 times gross revenue. Wow, now I'm going to get a lot of money out of my insiders. I didn't think it was worth that much. And then he asked the CPA, well, how'd you get that? Well, I've read other professional services seem to be getting 2-3 times of the gross revenue. So why should your professional service, why shouldn't you? Well, he proposed it to his 2 insiders, and they were, furious. They felt like they were being taken advantage of, and they quite promptly, within a few months, they left. What oftentimes a lot of people don't realize is if you ask for too much, the smart insider is going to make an automatic calculation in their own mind and says, yeah, it's worth buying the practice. A lot of systems are in places. Perhaps you got staff. Perhaps the name of the firm is going to be worth some money, but it's only worth so much. They can always open up their own shop and leave. So that's what these insiders said. And this is a very unfortunate because the insiders really wanted to do the deal. And that's actually that's the first thing that I ask clients that call me is, are there any insiders? I always believe you should, do deals with people who you already know and that they've been working for you. That should be the first consideration. So these people left, and they ended up, in essence, competing against David. So not only did he have some competition, then he had to start from scratch. He hired me, and then we had to find a third party. We found a third party, but the problem with finding a third party is, again, you don't really know them as well as you know the insiders. And then sometimes it's too late when you find out what the third party is like. So what's the lesson here? Don't rely on the CPA. The CPA, these formulas are often referred to as the rule of thumb, and sometimes it's a multiple of gross, sometimes it's a multiple of net. It's a very, very formulaic process, and sometimes it works, but it only works in mature professional services or mature industries. Essentially, what a valuation formula does is tries to predict the future. If a buyer buys some business from somebody, the valuation formula tries to say, all right, what is the buyer? How much revenue can a buyer expect? And then they come up with these fancy formulas, and then they come up with, all right, this is what the firm is going to be worth. Now, formulas actually work in mature industries or mature marketplaces. For example, oftentimes, dentists is a very mature marketplace compared to lawyers, as so is, CPAs. Why are they more mature? They're buying and selling dental practices and CPAs all the time. So essentially there is a market rate, but there's a market rate because when you try to predict the future, you can predict it because you know that if you have 200 patients in a dental practice, chances are they have some statistics that say, usually about 150 will try them out. The same thing with tax returns. In other words, there's predictable. When it comes to law practices, it's very, very unpredictable. Think about a criminal law practice. Think about a family law practice. I explained the simplest way to try to get your hands around whether a firm is worth something is imagine it's Friday and you decide to retire, and on Monday morning, your successor, the buyer, is sitting at your desk. Will they work with your successor? And what is the two-word answer you give to your clients all the time? It depends. And what does it depend upon? It depends upon the practice area. Sometimes, very much so, they'll probably will, and other times probably not. So what I do when I value a practice is very much like the Ruth Gehrig, DiMaggio, and Mantle. I specialize in ballpark figures. I understand the nuances of each practice because I'm trying to figure out what it depends upon. And some practices, it's pretty realistic to assume that there will be continued revenue. Other practice areas, quite frankly, will have virtually no value. So my job is, when appraising a law firm, is to make that determination. Because, and again, going back to the rule of thumb, you can't use a formula because that's assuming a family law practice is the same thing as a criminal law, which is the same thing as an immigration, which is the same thing as an estate planning. The only thing in common those practices have is they're owned by a lawyer. They are fundamentally different businesses. It's like comparing, a sale of a gas station to a Kona grocery store, to a software company. In other words, there's nothing in common. So again, don't rely on rules of thumb. You can only get range, and the reason for that is because it's such an immature industry. Let's turn to the final cautionary tale. We'll talk about Debbie again. This is most lawyers' worst nightmare. So we'll talk about Debbie. Debbie was married to John. John had actually a very modest, albeit successful, small firm. His sweet spot was helping represent, small local businesses. Each local business would provide him roughly with, 10, 20, 30,000 consistent revenue a year. So in my mind, that's a firm that should have value in the open marketplace. And where's the value? The idea is that John, during the transition period, whether it takes a few months, a few years, every practice is going to be different. A lot depends on the clientele. A lot depends on the type of advice the lawyer is providing. But the value is hopefully that John will be able to transfer those relationships to the buyer. And get it, and the buyer will essentially buy that business, but he has an edge on getting that business because he had the advantage of John, doing that transition, but making sure that the buyer was able to take it over. But John was not a very, let me just say, he was a very reluctant client. Much like most of you tuning in, who they don't want to necessarily talk to their lawyer because they're calling the lawyer because they have a problem. People don't want to call me because, again, they're seeing the end of their life, their mortality. I don't have to go into explaining that anymore. But in any event, John was one of the more reluctant ones that I've ever had, and he actually, said to me after he emailed me to set up a call, he says this was the toughest email that I have ever, sent in my life. So we worked together. We put together actually what I thought was a very good plan. We had a few good prospects to shop him around. And he said, no, I can't go forward, Roy. And here's the email that he wrote. I decide now is not the time to give up the ship for the moment. Let's kick the can down. Life is just too perfect to consider changing. In other words, he didn't want to deal with it. So let's fast forward a few years. And of course, unfortunately, John passed away, leaving a grieving widow, the grieving widow being Debbie. She's not, she's grieving. And what's happening? John left a mess. He didn't plan accordingly. So, and the phone still rings. John's gone. Debbie's answering the phone, scrambling, not knowing what to do. So open files, she's just giving them away to anybody she possibly can. Other for new business matters, they would be calling, and she would just hopefully she got a few names from some friends of hers to call up, and essentially was giving away these files. She finally got around to calling me back and saying, all right, what do I do? So I said, first of all, stop giving away the business to the extent you can. Let's go back to the list that John and I came up with a couple of years ago, and let's see if we can interest any of them. P.S. We did find, an interested buyer, but unfortunately, some of the key clients were already lost. So essentially, it was a fire sale, and you don't want that to happen. You don't want to have that happen at all. And then at the end of the day, when we're done with Debbie, this is the email I get. Thank you for the help. He was grateful. I know you tried to lead him down the right path, but he just wouldn't listen. Of course, he wished he had. So do his clients. Again, that's quite a cautionary tale. Okay, I want to turn away. I see I got about 10 minutes or so to talk some of the common questions that I get regarding, all right, who do I sell? Assuming there's no insiders, how do I find buyers? I guess the first people are going to be the insiders. Friendly competitors, believe it or not, are going to be the best people to think about. Usually you will know them, or certainly know them by reputation, whether it's in your practice area or in your community. And the advantage there is, that you know them, if you could like them and trust them. So again, friendly competitors are often good people to, usually that's in my short list when I work with clients. And then finally, firms seeking to expand a practice or geography. Unfortunately, the market is so immature that it's not that easy to find someone. You can hire people such as myself, but if you Google, I want to sell my law firm, I want to find a consultant, you will find that there are very, very few of us out there. So even that, you're limited. There are business brokers that you can turn to, and there are a handful, and I want to emphasize a handful, not many, who understand the legal marketplace, but they understand professional services, but they don't understand the unique nature. So they're the ones who think like the CPAs. If you got a law firm there, it's just like a dentist. So I could sell it. About every year or two, I get a call from a frustrated broker wanting to know what's going on and don't understand the realities of the marketplace. But again, if you find a broker who has worked with law firms and sells, then by all means, they may be able to help you. The reality is that there are a few and far between some of the local business brokers that you may think about doing. You can do it yourself. Just do some networking. Of course, the problem for some lawyers is they don't want word to get out that somehow they're thinking of retiring. They think all of a sudden business is going to go hell into a handbasket and there won't be nothing left to sell. But for some practice areas, it's easier to do than others without that risk. And then finally, you can advertise. Unfortunately, there's no central marketplace to advertise. I've heard of lawyers successfully selling firms on Craigslist, but I wouldn't hold your breath that that's good to find. And then you're selling to a stranger. Sometimes the price may be right, but then again, what do you don't really know. And there's going to be a transition. Oftentimes the deal may be an earnout. In other words, you're going to the sale proceeds will be some percentage of future revenue. You got to trust these people. Someone you find an advertisement, you're less likely to trust. Again, going back to the reasons why you want to do a deal with an insider. If it's an earnout, you can trust those insiders. You know these people. They have worked for you. Another question I get is, Roy, what do I do? I want to sell in 15 years. Tell me what I need to do, or 5 years or 10 years. And it's a simple answer. Some of you may recall President Obama, he had a theory of diplomacy, and that theory of diplomacy was don't do stupid, as you can see here in the slide. Look, I know the lawyer DNA. I pride myself on that. Every lawyer that I've worked with said, oh, I should do this, I should do this, I should improve this, I should improve that. And what's inevitable, they never do it. So I am realistic enough to know that if I tell someone or anyone thinks that they're going to all of a sudden improve their systems or do this or do that, that they shouldn't have done for 30 years, they're not going to do it. So again, what's stupid shit? Stupid shit is you're 75 years old and you sign a 5-year lease. That is dumb. That is dumb. And believe me, I've heard, I've had some people do that. That's not a very particular bright idea. Some people think I got this great location and isn't that worth extra money? Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. It may be, but oftentimes a buyer has their own offices and they plan on just absorbing you into their existing space. So they don't really care about your space. Another idea that lawyers have is I have this wonderful system to do this or wonderful system to do that. Isn't that going to enhance the value, Roy? And what's the answer? It depends. First of all, most lawyers, you have to realize that in their DNA, they're thinking to myself, my system's good enough. What the hell am I going to pay someone else for? So yeah, you may have paid it through buying it through somebody else, or you may have created it the hard way through sweat equity, but it's the rare lawyer who somehow thinks that your system is better. And even if they do, they're not going to necessarily pay extra for it. Now, will it make it more attractive to a buyer? Very possibly, but you can't necessarily quantify and say, all right, because of the system, your firm is worth X amount of money more. The marketplace is way too immature for that. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, oh man, this sounds complicated. I am better up closing the law firm. Well, Google, how should I close my law firm? And you will see it is a nightmare to figure out what to do with all of your closed files. If you do the deal right with a third party, most of the time, those files become the problem of the buyer and not yours. So just closing up shop is not necessarily the easy way if you do it the right way, the way the bar or your insurance carrier is going to recommend. Some of you may also be thinking, hey, I got Roy's book. I can figure it out. I'm a smart guy. I can do it myself. Look, and I know the lawyer DNA. They think they can do everything themselves. But think about it. You don't know what you don't know. You know the kind of trouble your clients get into when they think they can do it themselves. So practice what you preach. You've made a nice living being the expert. This may be something that you may want to hand over to somebody else to help you with. Winston Churchill once said, "He who fails to plan is planning to fail." It's an accident waiting to happen. If you don't have a plan in place, sleep better at night by getting something done sooner rather than later. I tell my clients, end your career on a high note. For some of you, the time is running out. I suspect I'm not going to be surprised if some of you are over 75. Not a good idea to have nothing in place. And believe me, I get plenty of calls from people, that old. Time is not necessarily on your side. My hope is that for many of you, time is on your side. And as John F. Kennedy once said, the time to put on a new roof is when the sun is shining. Presumably, it's still shining with you. So you can end your career again on a high note. I want you to leave your career with the same optimism and confidence you had when you entered it many, many moons ago, so you can retire and read that latest bestseller on the beach, wherever that beach may be. Okay, I see I have a few minutes for questions. And by the way, I want to emphasize, you have questions even after the program. Certainly, if you're listening to a recording, by all means, please email them to me at Roy Ginsburg. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I see I have a few here. We have a firm of about 15 attorneys, 6 shareholders. What are some valuation strategies we have been told by a CPA? No, they're not worth anything. Boo-hoo, no. Again, here's another CPA somehow thinking they have heard anecdotally that the goodwill is too personal. And actually in some practice areas, the goodwill is too personal and may not be worth much of anything. But to say it's not worth anything by the CPA, no. Again, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Each practice is going to be different. You can come up with ballparks, again, if you predict the future, which is not so easy, admittedly, but you can get a good idea, again, about if you are sitting at the desk on Monday and someone had retired on Friday, will they work with you? But one other thing is a good point about the CPA. Some of you may be aware that, CPAs, as there are certain CPAs who regularly value law practices in divorce, and they use formulas. And I will be the first to tell you that those formulas are valid in the context of a divorce, but there's a good reason for that. And the reason for that is on Friday, John or Mary, the lawyer, is married, and on Monday, they're now all of a sudden single. Now, I can predict that when the phone rings on Monday for a newly divorced lawyer, chances are they're going to work with the newly divorced lawyer. It's not a new person. So formulas work in a divorce setting. They do not work. Any difference if a building is part of a sale? Very good question. Ask that a lot. And the 2-word answer you give to your clients all the time: it depends. For some buyers, actually a limited number, they're very interested in buying the building. And there may be something that makes the firm more attractive. But just as often, if you tie the piece of real estate to the practice, it could eliminate a whole bunch of buyers. Because as I mentioned earlier, some buyers may already have, if it's a modest practice, if you're a solo, or even a small firm, they may have enough space and they have no interest in buying your building. And if you tie the building to the sale of the practice, it's actually make it less attractive. So at the end of the day, it's a wash. Let me see if I have any more questions. If the vendor can hang around and help. Yeah, it really depends on the practice area, how necessarily is the seller to hang around, so to speak, as this question said. For example, like sometimes in estate planning, it's not that necessary for the person to hang around as long as they're reachable every once in a while. Others where you gotta introduce, let's say a long-term client where there's consistent business, the transition could be months, if not longer. But some practice areas, the transition could really, be as short as a few months, and then just be available by phone or email. What I tell my seller clients is, generally speaking, most buyers will let you hang around if you continue to make money for them. I'm looking at my watch and I'm seeing that my half hour is running out. So let me just move on. Here's some more contact information. Again, I want to emphasize, feel free to contact me after you've digested what I've told you here this afternoon, as well as perhaps read my book. It's an easy read. It's a short read. And I think it's time. Here, I want to promote some of the other programs for the ABA. They're up there for next month. Some of them look pretty interesting. So I think now, Josh, is it time to turn it back over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Roy. And thank you for your insightful and essential discussion of the complexity of the retirement process and some helpful strategies. And thank you all today for attending today's webinar. If you guys are interested in learning any more, Roy has an ebook attached to your resource guide that I sent out. That's also available in the chat, and we'll also send that out again with any recording information. You will receive also a free 15-minute consultation if you'd like to email him. His information is available as well in the information packet. And on the screen, as you can see, we do have some upcoming on-demand and CLE programs from the Senior Lawyers Division. and they're available on our website at amboard.org. You can see that on the link on the bottom. You can also click the link on your webinar materials to get to any of the programs. Lastly, before leaving, just please complete our short survey with any of your ideas and information on today's program. And thank you for attending, and have a great day.